and welcome to this plenary session from the Digital Pavilion, courtesy of KTN. My name is Suzie Imber.
And I'm Dallas Campbell in a very rainy, miserable, grey London. It's making me sad. So, hey, we're not in the same room today, Suzie, which makes me sad as well.
Yeah, exactly. I'm at home in the Peak District today, but we have a lovely 2.5 hours of interviews, panelists and videos to show you today. So we're excited about that.
I'm really excited. We've got some amazing guests today, actually. And if you were with us during the first session we did when was that? A few days ago.
Last week, yeah.
Last week, exactly. It was really, really fascinating. We had some fantastic speakers. And I suppose then, Suzie, the theme very much was about collaboration. And we're gonna be extending that theme today, of course. Collaboration really is the key to everything. But we're also going to be talking a little bit about innovation. And I think more importantly, well, not more importantly, but also we're going to be talking about politics as well, the politics of climate change and how messy human politics feeds into things.
And we've got some wonderful guests today. We've got Manali Kumar will be talking to us. We've also got former US Vice President Al Gore dropping in for a few words, which is nice.
Yes, we do. And yeah, continuing that political thing. But I think actually before we get into our first guest, we are going to bring in from KTN, we've got Luca Badello and Andy Burnett, who's going to sort of tee up the session for us today and tell us a little bit about what we've got in store and what's going to be coming up. So I'm going to hand over to Luca and Andy.
Thank you, Dallas, and thank you, Suzie. Always a pleasure working with you. And welcome to the delegates and the speakers of today's plenary session of the Space and Geospatial Virtual Pavilion for COP26. I am Luca Badello, and I lead on Geospatial at KTN. I'm also co-curating the pavilion together with my colleague, Andy Bennett. Just over a week ago, we launched the Space and Geospatial Virtual Pavilion in collaboration with over 30 organizations, which have helped us to shape and deliver a program of events, of activities, of talks, which has been very diverse and engaging. We had really fantastic talks and fantastic session, and probably one of my favorite among those that I managed to watch. I was in Glasgow last week, so I didn't manage to watch all of them. Amongst those that I managed to watch, I think the element of security, our very first session, was probably one of my favorite, because it was able to display how remote sensing, Earth observation data and spatial analytics and climate data can narrate the important stories of displacement, of migration, which also illustrates how climate change contributes to global instability. And Andy, what was your favorite session, or the session that resonated with you most?
Well, it's been great, actually. I've been inspired by many of the sessions that I've seen in the last week. And I've basically been able to watch pretty much every single one. The security one, again, for me, was fascinating, seeing how the climate change is going to create more droughts, because it's going to create more conflict around the climate challenge. So that was fascinating. But also some of the ones that were run by the SENSE CDT, Centre for Doctoral Training, and the Geospatial Systems Centre for Doctoral Training as well. That was fascinating, getting to see what the students of tomorrow, students of today, and the politicians perhaps of tomorrow are working on around monitoring ice sheets from space, monitoring peatland as well. It's fascinating to see what they're doing. And I also just want to highlight the sessions that showed some of the startups that were that are doing some really interesting things, such as looking at electric vehicle charging and how we might adopt electric vehicles in a more efficient way as well. So check out those. I really encourage any of the participants today to go back and watch any of the shows that we've put on. They're available for another 90 days on the Pavilion platform, and then we'll be uploading them to our KTN YouTube channel as well. So you've got plenty of time to watch these things, but I really encourage you to do it because there's so much amazing content. And I'd just like to thank all the speakers and the curators who put so much effort into producing these sessions for us. Back to you, Lucas.
Thank you, Andy. Well, I didn't manage to watch all the sessions, but for those I managed to watch, My take is that geospatial intelligence is the key business intelligence to make better decisions and to gather the intelligence to build a better tomorrow. You cannot change what you cannot measure, and location data is the link identifier, and I always like to describe it like that help us to make the connection across data streams and links the objects, the infrastructure that we use every day, the roads, the building, our homes, with the people, us, our community, and the systems which heavily rely upon, like transport system, energy system, and the environment, the natural habitat that supports our well-being. And this is very important to understand and to measure. And I think geospatial analytics is not very well understood in this respect. Today we're going to have the first of 2 days of plenaries, and this morning we're going to talk primarily about the role of innovation and collaborations, and how building collaboration can accelerate the pace at which we bring innovation and new products and new services. And we're going to look at this in the context of resilience, of building resilience, supporting with building adaptation, and also unlocking financial opportunities. And we have an amazing lineup of speakers, as Suzie and Dallas have mentioned before. We have Manali Kumar from the University of St. Gallen, talking about the international politics of climate change. We're going to have a personal account from Gore, also introducing ClimateTRACE, which is an important collaboration, but also discussing how he supported climate scientists back in the 80s to access intelligence data or climate data from the intelligence community. We're going to also have Argiro Cavada from NASA, looking beyond the net zero and at the role of space data, geospatial data analytics in supporting the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goal. And a fantastic panel, a panel of thought leader in their space, looking at innovation from very different perspectives: social innovation, data innovation, ethics. There's going to be a very interesting conversation around innovation and collaboration. And starting from this afternoon, we will have a series of parallel session looking at the role of space and spatial analytics in tackling challenges in specific sectors, starting with transport, but also adaptation and resilience, and science and innovation. Well, throughout the days, just one last word, throughout the day, please engage with us, engage with the speaker, engage with the organization collaborating with us, with other delegates, ask questions. Just bring new ideas to the table, because to tackle climate change, we need new ideas, and we hope to solve them with the support of the power of place. Thank you very much.
Great stuff. And so if you want to ask a question, then there's a Q&A function at the bottom of the page. You can click on that Q&A, type your question in. We'll be monitoring the questions throughout the session today. If someone else has asked a question that you really like, then make sure that you like that question so that it rises to the top of our list and it becomes top of our priorities of questions to pose to our panelists. And again, we encourage you to please do ask away. Anything that pops into your mind, please do engage with our speakers today. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I always think people are far too polite in this question tag. Like, oh, I better not ask anything too difficult, but please ask difficult questions, and hopefully we'll get some interesting answers. Hey, we've got a lot to pack in, so I think we should crack on, Suzie. Who do we have first up?
Okay, so first up, we've got Barbara Ryan. She's the chair of the World Geospatial Industry Council.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Barbara Ryan, and I am director of the World Geospatial Industry Council. I'm here this morning just to spend a minute or two talking about GHG, greenhouse gas monitoring from space, and a collaborative venture that we've just undertaken to advance climate action. But before doing so, I'd like to extend just a personal appreciation to the UK and KTN in particular for the events at the UK Virtual Pavilion these last couple weeks. We actually launched the report that I'm about to talk to last week at the UK Virtual Pavilion. And it's been just a phenomenal couple weeks for us, because for those of us that haven't been able to attend in Glasgow, there have been many, many events at the UK Virtual Pavilion. So thank you for that. The venture that I'd like to mention is a joint report that GEO, the Group on Earth Observations, ClimateTRACE, an organization that you'll hear a little bit more about shortly from former Vice President Al Gore, and WGIC. And this is a mapping of capabilities across public, private, and hybrid satellite missions, GHG, greenhouse gas monitoring missions. And to the best of my knowledge, it's the first systematic analysis that's been done across those three sectors. We've had wonderful decades of work that has been done by the Committee on Earth Observation Satellites for public sector missions. But again, this is the first time that we've brought in private sector and hybrid satellite missions. Now, what you'll see from looking at the report, and it's downloadable both at the GEO website, earthobservations.org, and our website, WGICcouncil.org, you will see that in the 1990s and the 2000s, 100% of those GHG missions were public. As we got into 2010 to 2020, we saw the introduction of a private sector company. In fact, it was a British and Canadian company called GHGSat. They have and are delivering greenhouse gas monitoring data from space right now. And just recently, another private satellite mission, Orbital Sidekick, has launched, but it's not yet quite delivering data. So that was the 2010s to 2020s. What we're seeing from the 2021-22 into the future is the introduction of hybrid satellite missions. Now, while they're all in development right now, it's still quite interesting because it's the combination of public and private and or philanthropic missions. And what I'm so excited about this is that for me, it speaks to the importance of collaboration. You will hear later that no one country, no one organization can tackle the challenges that are in front of us and right now facing us with climate change. And yet, if we are able to bring assets from across different sectors, across different monitoring capabilities together, then at least I feel we have a chance of addressing this issue and advancing climate action. So again, thank you very much to the UK and KTN, WGIC, a global not-for-profit trade association of private sector companies working in the Earth observation and geospatial sectors. So if you are a private sector company out there, we would love to talk to you about joining WGIC. Again, thank you very much and good luck with the rest of this plenary session. Bye-bye.
Thank you very, very much indeed for that video, Barbara. That was a terrific little upsum, particularly of TRACE. We're going to continue that TRACE theme with our next speaker, who I think we're all very excited to hear from. He's done a very personal video for us here today, Suzie.
Yes, so we'd like to introduce Al Gore, who is former US Vice President, but also the lead for TRACE. And so he has recorded, especially for us today, a short video.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, and I want to extend my thanks to KTN and the more than 30 organizations who have come together to support this first-of-its-kind event at COP26. Tackling the climate crisis successfully is something that no one person, organization, or country can take on by itself. It's critical that we come together in forums like these to enable innovation and collaboration on this, which is obviously the most important challenge of our lifetimes. The role of satellite and geospatial data in addressing the climate crisis is too often overlooked or often not well understood outside of a small community of scientists, technologists, and data analysts. But indeed, our ability to see the world from space and to get a truly global picture of what is happening on the only planet we call home is foundational to our ability to take action. In the late 1980s, when I was serving in the United States Senate, I had numerous discussions with climate scientists who were trying desperately to better understand the scope of the crisis afflicting our climate balance and to predict future impacts more accurately and understand the solutions better. They were frustrated in part because they knew full well that there was a whole constellation of satellites and other kinds of sensors operated by the intelligence community of our government, sensors and data streams that could give them a much clearer picture of what was happening here on Earth. So they could tell where the glaciers were retreating and how quickly wildfires were spreading, and many other things that they could understand with better measurements, but they were shut out of having access to that information. It was collected in the black, in the intelligence area. Those satellites were controlled by the U.S. intelligence community, and obviously the data was classified, and sometimes for very good reasons. But while the intelligence community was using satellite imagery to scan for military threats to the nation, in retrospect, it's easy to see they had a major blind spot around analyzing what was quickly becoming the single greatest existential threat to the U.S. and to humanity as a whole, the greatest threat we've ever faced. And so back when I was in the Senate, I launched an effort to collaborate with the intelligence community. And I was on the Armed Services Committee and had been on the Intelligence Committee. And so I was able to work with the CIA, with the Pentagon, and with many others, and with a brilliant woman working at the CIA named Linda Zoll, and with my National Security Advisor, Leon Firth. We developed a program called Medea that granted climate scientists top secret clearances for specific purposes and gave them access to this incredible array of satellite imagery and voluminous amounts of data, almost too much to manage, all of it coming from the intelligence community. That new access actually enabled giant leaps forward in our early understanding of the impacts of the climate crisis. Take, for example, the sharp loss of Arctic sea ice. Just to look at what was happening, we had some overhead pictures, but the intelligence community and the Navy and the Department of Defense have a particular interest in understanding precisely how thick the ice was and is, location by location, so that as part of the national security operations, they could quickly surface submarines as part of the deterrent force without fear of damaging the submarines and endangering their crews, because they could only surface through ice that was 3.5 feet thick or less. So they needed measurements of it. And of course, that kind of precise measurement and monitoring of the thickness of sea ice over the entire Arctic and over periods of time, that was exactly the kind of data that climate scientists needed to enhance their insights into one of the areas of the planet that was changing the most rapidly, the disappearance of the Arctic ice cover in summer. And that changes the albedo, and it's really important for a lot of reasons, of course. Anyway, through this effort, we not only increased collaboration between American scientists and the intelligence community, we fostered international cooperation because the KGB in Russia came on board. I was managing the binational relationship, and the Prime Minister of Russia joined with me, and we had the KGB and the CIA together. Once bitter rivals in the space race and, of course, in the Cold War, they came together to collaborate on the processing and sharing of data and imagery on the Arctic. And eventually, in the mid-1990s, we were able to declassify more than 800,000 images of the Arctic taken between 1960 and 1972, which gave an unprecedented view of our planet to any scientist who was studying the Earth system. Access to those images then unlocked an untold number of insights about the toll that continuing to treat the atmosphere like an open sewer is taking on our planet. And it helped to demonstrate not only the power and utility of geospatial information, but the necessity of robust environmental climate monitoring efforts. And today, geospatial monitoring is now being democratized in a sense. Private satellite companies and coalitions of NGOs aren't waiting around for 20 years to get the declassified data. They're collecting it themselves. And we're no longer limited to what we can see with the naked eye because we're using the entire electromagnetic spectrum to understand and monitor the activities on the surface of the Earth and the emissions that are putting our planet's future at risk. So, in other words, we're entering an era of radical transparency, an era where open access to Earth observation data can enable real action to reduce emissions. For too long, our collective ability to reach net zero has been stymied in part by a lack of transparency and accountability in emissions data. Government policymakers, as well as leaders and decision makers in civil society, in corporate sustainability and investing and innovation, all of those groups need accurate, timely, reliable, and actionable information in order to inform their emissions reduction strategies and to measure the progress in the right direction, hopefully, or to correct course if they find they're moving in the wrong direction. The role of the organizations and companies like those hosting this pavilion, and like so many of you who are leaders in this discipline, has never been more important. As we enter the final days of this COP, leaders in government and the private sector are finalizing their pledges and plans to reduce emissions. Some will move quickly to reach net zero, while others will drag their feet. Businesses and governments have to be armed with information to measure their progress toward meeting these goals, and it needs to be transparently accessible to everybody. Advocates for climate action must be able to hold entities of all sorts accountable to actually meeting their pledges. And now is the moment to harness the stunning advances in technology, in satellite monitoring, in remote sensing of all kinds, and in machine learning to deliver actionable information that can help us reduce emissions quickly. That's why I'm helping to lead a brand new coalition of data scientists and nonprofit research organizations called ClimateTRACE. TRACE stands for Tracking Real-Time Atmospheric Carbon Emissions. This September, we at ClimateTRACE released the world's first comprehensive accounting of global greenhouse gas emissions, based for the first time primarily on direct, independent observation in real time. That inventory is now open and accessible to anyone looking to inform their decisions about decarbonization with clear data, with data that allows them to drive action forward. It's all online right now. You can go to it at climatetrace.org. Our goal is to help usher in an era of radical transparency and universal accountability by putting everything out in the open, because we believe very strongly that the old truism is correct. You can only manage what you can measure. And for far too long, government leaders, executives, investors, and climate activists alike have had to rely on data that is really opaque. It's filled with gaps and omissions, and it comes almost entirely from self-reporting, a lot of it from the polluters themselves, and a lot of it is way out of date because it takes them years to collect it and verify it and then release it. For governments, business leaders, and advocates alike, having accurate and comprehensive real-time emissions monitoring is now typically either prohibitively expensive or logistically impractical, at least at the scale needed to collect truly actionable information. In fact, more than 100 countries out of the almost 200 lack access to comprehensive emissions inventories of any sort from as recently as 5 years ago. So likewise, nearly all nations lack emissions data across all major sectors of their economies for last year. Now, in contrast, I'm proud that ClimateTRACE is providing independent accounting, verification, and tracking of all global emissions. We're utilizing data from more than 300 existing satellites, more than 11,100 sensors, land-based, sea-based, air-based, and we are looking for and finding relevant information from thousands of internet data streams that can help us produce timely and specific emissions data, and to constantly perfect algorithms and test them against real on-site information from those who make it available to us, not to use, but to use it to train the algorithms. And they're getting more accurate every single week. We're harnessing the power of artificial intelligence and machine learning to identify patterns and trends. And this process allows us to get more specific than ever before and enables us to improve rapidly because more new data comes in every single day. For example, we are already able to see that emissions from oil and gas production and refining have been vastly undercounted and underreported. We now can make public the real data. Among the world's top countries that submit regular inventories, emissions from oil and gas may collectively be around double what has been reported in the recent UNFCCC reports. Further, it's likely that over 1 billion additional tons of CO2 equivalents per year, more than the annual emissions of the 100 lowest ranking emitting countries combined, has gone completely uncounted by countries that are not required to report their oil and gas emissions regularly. But soon we will be able to give accurate real-time emissions data from every single individual oil and gas refinery, every power plant, every factory, and all other major sources of emissions on monthly and weekly timescales, and then eventually much more frequently than that. This is data that can be used today by businesses that are trying to green their supply chains. It can be used by investors to allocate funds to businesses that are actually reducing their emissions. It can be used by governments to identify priorities for regulation and the deployment of clean energy resources. We're putting everything out in the open in order to make climate action easier and to accelerate our progress in reaching net zero emissions. It's advances like these in transparency, in innovation, in collaboration that give me a tremendous amount of hope for our future. We have the solutions we need to solve the climate crisis, and those solutions are getting better and cheaper by the day. But we also need you. We need you to lead the way in making your data open and accessible to those who are working together to tackle the greatest challenge that humanity has ever faced. We need you to champion and adhere to common data quality standards so that we can ensure we're working with the best possible information. We need you to collaborate with one another, with researchers, with climate advocates, and with those in positions of leadership. And we at ClimateTRACE welcome opportunities to collaborate and help build this much needed infrastructure together. As UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said when the IPCC released its latest assessment of the climate crisis last August, he said, "This is code red for humanity." Well chosen words, because we have no time left to waste. You have the power and the information to help make a significant impact in a positive way on the future of our planet and on the lives of everyone in it. The future is in our hands. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Al Gore, the former next president of the United States, Al Gore, I should say. I just think, as he was chatting there, just remembering Inconvenient Truth from the first time I saw it, and how that was such a line in the sand, I think, for much of what we're talking about today. Radical transparency, I guess that's our takeaway fact. Lots of historical stuff there he was mentioning as well. Here's a question for you, Suzie. Clyde T. Holliday. Who was Clyde T. Holliday? Does that name ring a bell?
No.
For no one it rings a bell, but I reckon he's a great unsung hero of what we're talking about, because in 1946, a guy called Clyde T. Holliday, who was an engineer, designed a camera package, like a Heath Robinson, early, 1940s camera, so with film and everything, which he stuck into the nose cone of a V2 rocket that the Americans had after the war. And he sent it up into space. And it was the very first image of the Earth taken from space. And you can look at it and you can just see the limb of the Earth, and it's kind of grainy black and white. But Fred Hoyle, of course, Fred Hoyle, of course, who we know when we think of the term the Big Bang, he said, once a photograph of the Earth taken from the outside is available, a new idea as powerful as any in history will be let loose. So there you go. That's from the sort of 1940s, and he was absolutely right. And of course, Al Gore sort of talked about that, the importance of seeing ourselves from space, and how transformative that is. So 75 years really of seeing ourselves from space. Anyway, sorry, that was wittering. I just suddenly got, listening to Al, I started thinking about all these sorts of things. Hey, we've got a proper question from real people. I'm going to throw it to you, Suzie, because you use a lot of data and you use a lot of these algorithms and a lot of this. And this is a question about trees. Can we have software to count trees and profile individual trees for its entire life rather than area-based calculations, if that makes sense? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. So this is an idea where we go from mapping the regions of forest that exist to looking at individual trees. And it is indeed possible to do. With looking down from above, we can see individual trees, we can map those trees, we can assess the size of those trees as well. Not tiny saplings, they have to be a certain size or above. Certainly in the UK, we've moved rapidly in this direction, being able to map the locations of trees in the UK. And of course, the question asks whether we can do that over their lifetimes. We've only just developed the capability to identify these trees in isolation. But of course, now we have that ability, we can then map these trees going forwards. And it's important for all sorts of reasons. You can imagine if there's a massive storm, we'll be able to look at the exact trees that are taken out by that storm, for example, and the loss of our habitats and the trees in association with that. So yes is the answer.
I think, is that not just mind-blowing to you, the fact that in 75 years we've gone from sticking a camera onto a rocket to the fact that we can now monitor individual trees? To me,
I think it is, yeah, and I think it kind of goes back to what Al Gore was talking about just there, which is sort of open data access, the ability for people to take data and use it to create software to do these amazing things for monitoring the environment. And we've gone from a situation where data was closed and protected by those that took that data to now, hopefully in the future, even more so, an open data policy where anyone can use this data for the general good.
Brilliant. So, okay, from one politician, Al Gore, we're going to slightly continue the political theme, I suppose, because coming up now, we have Manali Kumar, who is a postdoctoral fellow at the Institute of Political Science at the University of St. Gallen. Manali, are you there?
I am. Thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to talk today a little bit about the international politics around climate change.
I'm absolutely fascinated by what you're going to talk about today, because politics is messy, it's difficult, it's kind of gnarly and kind of grisly. So I think you've got a few slides. So you're going to talk for sort of 10, 12 minutes or so, and then you're going to join myself and Suzie for a little chat about that afterwards. So I'm going to throw it over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, so, we've heard so much about climate change this year, starting with Biden's much lauded climate summit in April to the UN General Assembly meeting this September, and finally the long awaited COP26 that's ongoing these days. But, you know, with the number of press releases and announcements that we've heard in the last few days, one would think that the climate crisis is finally being solved. But how seriously should we take some of these inspiring speeches, and why has there been such little action on climate change is a question that still remains very much on our minds. Now, the latest data shows that the global average temperature has already increased more than 1 degree Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. Very simply, we know that the climate crisis is already here. And if we consider the future greenhouse gas emission scenarios and how these might affect temperatures under different assumptions, here in this chart, we can see the thin blue line, which shows that even if all the current pledges and targets were implemented as promised, global temperatures will still increase by about 2.4 degrees Celsius by the year 2100. So we're already very far off track when it comes to meeting the Paris Agreement goal of limiting warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius and aiming for warming of only 1.5 degrees. So why do such small increases in temperature even matter, right? We're only talking about 1 or 2 degrees. The problem is that with 1 degree Celsius of warming, we're already seeing that heat waves, wildfires, floodings, and superstorms are becoming more common. And these kinds of events come with tremendous human and material costs. And unfortunately, these extreme climate events are going to become only more common and more unpredictable in the coming decades. So as we become 2 degrees warmer, huge parts of the planet are going to become too hot for people to live. As deserts expand, there will be less land available for habitation and agriculture. Sea levels will rise, coastal areas will get submerged, many cities and island nations will simply cease to exist. And we will have to confront millions of climate refugees in the coming decades, along with more poverty, more destruction of infrastructure. And the material costs are going to be extremely high. And even if we're able to absorb those economic costs, we have to wonder if we're willing to accept the human and ecological costs that are going to come with all of that. And so mitigating further climate change and adapting to the changes that have already taken place is not optional. We have to take steps to limit further global warming and its effects. We must peak greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible and reduce the concentration of greenhouse gases that are already there in the atmosphere. And the estimated costs of such mitigation policies is around 1.6 to 3.8 trillion US dollars per year. We also have to start working on adaptation, which involves adjusting to the current and future effects of climate change. And the goal here is to really reduce the risks and vulnerabilities that people and societies face. And this is going to cost an estimated $180 billion per year. So the costs of both mitigation and adaptation are going to be very high for all countries involved. But developing societies will face much higher risks and also lower adaptive capacities due to their lower levels of social and economic development. So let's talk a little bit about mitigation. We know that around 73% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from burning fossil fuels for energy to power our industries, building, and transportation. So it is clear that we need to decarbonize our energy systems away from fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas, and use more and more low carbon sources of energy, such as nuclear and renewables. But decarbonizing remains a big challenge. Even in 2019, 84% of the global primary energy came from fossil fuels, compared to only about 16% from low carbon sources. So global energy consumption is still growing. And instead of increasing the share of energy we get from low carbon sources, the world is just burning more and more fossil fuels to meet growing energy demands. You know, politicians may not have run out of excuses yet, but the planet has run out of time. Greenhouse gas emissions have grown at an average of 1.4% per year since 2010, reaching a new peak of concentrations in 2019. And yet, major economies are displaying a stunning lack of urgency about reducing emissions immediately. The fossil fuel industry has spent decades denying climate science and bribing politicians. They have also sent the biggest delegation to COP26 with 503 representatives. This, while many representatives of poorer and developing countries and civil society organizations have been unable to travel to Glasgow. We have 100 fossil fuel companies being represented at COP26. And if we look at the individual actions of countries, Australia wants to cut its emissions without limiting fossil fuels, and its emissions reductions minister wants to promote Australia as a safe and reliable destination to invest in fossil fuels. And some 20 countries have promised to end financing fossil fuels abroad. However, many of these countries, including the US, will continue to export fossil fuels abroad. So in fact, leading economies like the UK and Australia are considering new fossil fuel projects when we need to be moving away from fossil fuels. And the world is continuing to spend hundreds of billions of dollars to subsidize the fossil fuel industry every year. Now, this figure shows us the top 10 polluters worldwide. The top 5 are China, the US, the European Union, India, and Russia. The bulk of their emissions come from burning fossil fuels for electricity and heat, manufacturing, and transportation. Together, the top 10 polluting countries emit 2/3 of the world's greenhouse gases. And here we can see the per capita energy for the top 10 polluters from different sources. The share of low carbon sources is very low in each of these economies and nowhere near the levels needed to limit global warming. Clearly, each of them must act urgently to reduce their emissions and decarbonize their economies. So why don't countries do more? Apart from domestic political reasons, international politics and the difficulties of finding agreements between nearly 200 countries is also an important factor. Now, developing countries, especially Brazil, China, and India, have long argued that because global warming has been brought about by the economic activities of today's industrialized developed countries, they must also take the lead in mitigating climate change. International climate agreements also acknowledge this argument in the form of the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, CBDR, which is included in the landmark 1992 United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is popularly known as UNFCCC. Now, this principle recognizes that as developing countries continue to meet their developmental needs, their emissions will also continue to grow. Therefore, the CBDR principle requires developed countries to take the lead in mitigating climate change. And building on this principle, the 1997 Kyoto Protocol set binding emissions reductions targets for developed countries while exempting developing countries from such commitments. Although the 2009 Copenhagen summit was not very successful, developed countries committed to jointly mobilize $100 billion per year in climate finance for developing economies to help with their mitigation activities. And the 2015 Paris Agreement set the goal of limiting global temperature increase to 2 degrees Celsius by 2100, while pursuing efforts to limit the increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And this is to be achieved by peaking developed countries' greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible, while recognizing that it will take developing countries longer to do so. It also established binding commitments for all countries to announce their nationally determined contributions towards how they were going to work towards achieving climate mitigation goals. Now, these arguments about the historic emissions and therefore current responsibility of developed countries is reflected in emissions data. Here we can see that since the year 1750, the vast majority of cumulative greenhouse gas emissions have come from Europe and North America. So it really is no surprise that developing countries expect developed economies to take the lead in mitigating global warming. However, the CBDR principle has become a major point of disagreement in multilateral negotiations, as some developing countries like China and India have steeply rising emissions today. But these arguments about the rising emissions of emerging powers like China and India ignore two crucial facts. First, as the figure on the left shows, the increase in developing country emissions is a rather recent phenomenon. And although China does have the world's largest aggregate emissions today, in fact, China's per capita emissions are much lower than the United States. Per capita emissions of other developing countries like Indonesia, Brazil, and India are even lower. The second thing to note is on the figure on the right. There is a huge gap in per capita GDP between developed and developing economies. So countries like the US, Canada, and Japan have much higher GDP per capita than countries like India and even China. As a result, developing economies today not only face much bigger challenges in responding to climate change, but they also face the double challenge of industrializing while avoiding the carbon-intensive path to development and prosperity that today's developed economies benefited from. This is not to say that developing countries should have the freedom to emit as much as they want for as long as they need to catch up. But we must recognize that the richest 1% of the global population contributes twice as many emissions as the world's 50% poorest people. And so the only solution is to help developing countries, including countries like India, get access to the technologies, infrastructure, and finance that they need to reduce their emissions. Which brings us to climate finance. Despite committing in Copenhagen in 2009 to collectively mobilize $100 per year in climate finance for developing countries, in 2019, developed countries contributed just under $80 billion. Most developed countries are not providing as much financial assistance as they should. And what's worse is that 80% of the finance so far has been in the form of loans rather than grants in aid. This graphic shows us which countries are contributing their fair share of climate finance and which ones are not. Larger, wealthier, and more carbon-intensive economies are considered to have a greater responsibility to provide climate finance. We can see that while some major economies, especially Germany and to a lesser extent France and Japan, are meeting their commitments, most developed countries are not providing as much financial assistance as they should. The worst offender is the United States. While its fair share is estimated at $43.4 billion, in 2018, it only provided $1.8 billion. President Biden has said he intends to increase the US's contribution to $11.4 billion per year by 2024. However, that's a target that is very far away and will still only be a fraction of the financial assistance for which the United States is responsible. The fault line between developed and developing economies is likely going to be deeper by the end of COP26. The choice we face today is between pursuing short-term prosperity and facing future devastation, or bearing costs today to safeguard the future of the planet. I cannot end on a positive note, I'm sorry. For too long have we deceived ourselves with false optimism. But 25 years of climate inaction leaves very little room for optimism going forward. Even if we assume that the pledges being made today will actually be implemented, greenhouse emissions will continue until at least 2070. The planet will continue to become warmer. Greenhouse gas emissions will continue to get concentrated in the atmosphere. We are going to lose more biodiversity, and climate events are going to become more extreme and more unpredictable. So we need to face the reality that it may be too late to mitigate climate change, and the reality that we need to start investing in confronting and adapting to the climate change that we're already experiencing now.
Manali, thank you so much for your talk. Oh, it's kind of it is a bleak ending to your talk, but thank you very, very much for that sort of overview of where we are. I suppose, you know, this idea of keeping 1.5 alive, which is the sort of mantra of this particular COP meeting. Are we going to be able to keep 1.5 alive, in your opinion? It's kind of a no. I suppose the thing I really want to talk about is this idea of politics, because of course so much of this comes down to big politics, but big politics is messy. is there a way you can sort of just cut through the Gordian knot and ignore big politics? Because it's all very well saying, oh, well, governments need to do more, but governments do what governments do, and they have to think about their populations, and they have a billion other things to think about. How do we change the psychology, I suppose, of the politics, which is kind of what you need to do if you want everyone to act in a radical way?
I mean, I'm not sure that any big meaningful action can really take place without governments also implementing policies towards that, right? And there are so many things that governments are doing today that run completely counter to what we need to be doing, like fossil fuel industry subsidies. So these kinds of policies are not things that, we can move forward with without governments cooperating. We need governments to start implementing policies that move us away from fossil fuels. We need governments to start investing in innovation so we can develop technologies that will bring us forward, right? Government investments have always been a very important part of technological innovation. The internet was made possible by that. So really, politics is a stumbling block, but I'm afraid there is no way to sort of short circuit or go around the politics.
Manali, you very nicely described to us the need for developed countries to support developing nations in decarbonising their economies, and you gave a very clear description of that. I just wonder, you mentioned that funding has been flowing in that direction. Are there any projects that are particularly positive examples of this that you could highlight for us?
I mean, look, the funding has been flowing towards that, but it is not nearly the amount of funding that is needed. And it's also funding that is going in the form of loans, which means that developing countries are then on the hook for repaying them in the future, rather than, receiving aids that they can then use. So that is a big problem with climate finance at the moment. And, the quantum of funds that are being provided is so small, $80 billion in 2019 for all the developing economies. That's really not a lot of finance, and a lot needs to be done in this area so countries can start moving towards building infrastructure for low carbon sources of energy. And also there have to be a lot more technology transfers from the West to developing economies.
Thank you. I've been reading a lot recently about the psychologies of belief, about why inaction happens in the face of existential crisis like this. And so much of it comes down to the human brain and to human psychology. In fact, there's a book I've been reading, which I'm going to hold up because I recommend it. It's called I'm Right and You're an Idiot. And it's a series of interviews about climate change, about why people think different things about climate change across the political spectrum. And it's a really, really fascinating read. And I sort of want anyone who's involved in climate change and debates to read this book to try and understand why kind of inaction happens. And it seems to be that, in terms of people who are still sort of reluctant to change and don't want to change, it seems that people get their scientific knowledge and their ideas about things like climate science from people and institutions they trust. Who share similar values. And if you don't fundamentally trust institutions or politicians or whatever it is, there's always going to be a blockage. So how can we foster more trust between institutions and the public, between the public and decision makers, to get more of a consensus?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a very important point, right? And there are two factors. One is, of course, just how the human mind and human psychology work. And something like climate change is, first of all, we've thought for a long time that this is something that will happen far in the future. And so it's very easy to discount something that, is not present and immediate. And so it was easy to just forget about it. It's going to happen in the future. Well, it's already happening now. But the problem is that then it is so terrible and so terrifying that you don't want to confront it. We all have so many everyday things that occupy all of our attention. But the bigger problem is, just how much science has been undermined by certain political groups and certainly a lot of corporations. This has been a huge problem in the United States, especially where systematic denial of science has happened for decades. That happened also, in the last few months around Corona. We saw so much terrible information. There's active misinformation and disinformation. And so we have this environment today where expertise is really not relied upon or trusted by people. There is this anti-expertise movement as well. And so I think this is a big challenge that we will have to tackle on a societal level. I think just more public speaking from analysts and scholars and scientists is going to be more important to rebuild some trust in society towards expertise, is going to be an important factor.
That's brilliant. Listen, we're sort of running out of time, but thank you very, very much indeed. I think that you're right. Those ideas you brought up about how we better communicate science and bring more people in is really, really important. Dan Kahan is someone I recommend who people should read, who writes a lot about the politics of science communication around climate science. Dan Kahan, give him a Google, really good. Manali, thank you so much for your talk. Thank you so much for your slightly pessimistic slides and talk, but it's been really, really helpful. So thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Manali. So up next, we have the Coalition of Forest Nations, which I'm really excited to hear about. And there's a collaboration, Michael Mitchell and colleagues discussing the Coalition of Forest Nations. So let's have that presentation next.
My name is Michael Mitchell, Project Manager for the Coalition for Rainforest Nations. I'd like to thank KTN for allowing us to join with them today. I'm joined here at COP26 with Federica Vieta, our Managing Director at the Coalition, along with Eloise Gouidi, our greenhouse gas technical expert in the Republic of Congo. First, Federica, please explain our partnership with the group on Earth observations and how that work was implemented in Mozambique.
Sure, thank you, Michael, and thank you, our friends from KTN, to having us today. Let me explain why, first of all, data are so important. We are here from Glasgow, where there is agreement by 196 countries towards one common goal. To help to achieve that, we have a global stock take every 5 years. Every 5 years, so countries need to present reliable data that are always stringent and bracketed down. So it's very important the country will be able to provide transparent, reliable, consistent and accurate as possible estimate for their emissions and removal of greenhouse gas inventories. For rainforest countries, for developing countries in general, this is normally a challenge and several lack of also capacity to generate estimate with these qualifiers. So that's why the CFRN stepped in and trying to build a partnership that can provide, address some of these issues. One of the partnerships we are here to talk with you today is about the partnership we have in Geo with Imber, the Brazilian Space Agency, and Mozambique. What we're doing, all of us together with Mozambique, we are doing wall-to-wall maps from 1990 to 2019. They've been produced using latest technology available. They will be allowed the verification of land use and land use changes across the years, based on the analysis of the satellite data with spatial resolution of 30 meters. And the idea is really that we plan to finalize this first pilot project in the next, hopefully, 6 months, and that could be replicable in many other rainforest countries.
Thank you, Federica. And Eloise, as the lead expert in Congo, please tell us how the use of satellite imagery was used there to accomplish goals.
Yes, thank you, Michael, and I'm very happy to be here. Yes, so the goal in Congo was to have a very good and reliable data for the 6 IPCC land use categories that would be represented in a consistent manner for the 30 years time series from 1990 to 2020. To do so, we collaborated with US Forest Service and FAO, as well as in the country with the Ministry of Environment, together with the Ministry of Forestry, the Institute of Geography, and the University of Mahenongabe, which had sent experts to take part in the different trainings sessions on the tool that we use was Collectors Online. During the preparation, we also had national agreement on the national protocol for data collection that was followed by 3 months of data collecting. And finally, with sessions on quality control to ensure that the data will be used in the next greenhouse gas inventory. And that is the short example about them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. Thank you, KTM. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much to Michael and his panel on the Coalition of Forest Nations, which is fantastic. In fact, we had another session on that exact topic last week, and it's a really, really interesting area. We've just been, Suzie and I have just been chatting more about Benali's talk as well, about how the pessimism was sort of what we took away, but actually those difficult questions and those difficult areas are really what we need to be talking about. I want you to, if anyone's watching and you've got some questions or some thoughts or some ideas, stick them in the chat box, and we'd love to sort of interrogate some of those as well. Keep your questions coming. We feel a bit light. Oh, hang on. Yeah, we're a bit light on questions. So if you're watching this and you're thinking about things, or you're cross about something, or you disagree with something, whatever it is, get in touch and we'll do it. I'm just going to I'll hold up my book again. You're right, I'm right, and you're an idiot. Really, really good book about conversations about climate change and why people believe different things and why we get stuck and why politics is messy and what have you. Anyway, so next up, we've got another video. We've got Sam Fleming is our next presentation. Sam Fleming is the founder of EarthBlox, which is a powerful no-code planetary data solution builder. We empower anyone to make use of satellite data to support climate change mitigation and adaptation activities. And again, this goes back to what Al Gore was talking about, this idea of radical transparency, which is really going to be such a key thing. So let's have our presentation from Sam Fleming from EarthBlox.
Hi, I'm Sam Fleming, co-founder of EarthBlox. EarthBlox is the most powerful, no-code planetary solutions builder. It works just like Lego. With modular blocks that interconnect, anyone, including you, can extract hugely valuable insights from petabytes of global satellite data. We are at the centre of two multi-trillion-dollar economic shifts: the digital transition and the sustainability transition. Within these shifts, we are empowering everyone to create powerful Earth observation insights to deliver positive change for our planet. From the decision maker to the analyst, you can create mission-critical insights from the 600 plus Earth observation satellites that orbit around us today. The need for no-code planetary scale intelligence is massive, but so are the barriers. To harness the power of satellite data, you need coding skills, EO expertise, bandwidth, significant storage and high-performance computing, or a really large budget. From sustainable agriculture, managing supply chains and nature-based solutions, to monitoring risks like forest fires and flooding, EarthBlox removes these barriers. Here's how.
Our planet is changing. Satellite imagery provides insights into how, when and where it's changing. But until now, you needed in-house or outsourced experts with coding skills to manipulate the data. Now there's a way to create insights in minutes without writing a single line of code. EarthBlox is an intuitive, no-coding software as a service, bringing everyone quick and easy access to the power of planetary scale data. Explore anywhere on Earth within a simple visual interface, drag and drop blocks to compare the datasets, or custom build workflows. EarthBlox is so easy to use, it's like Lego for satellite data. And with cloud-based processing, the results are available wherever you are.
At EarthBlox, we have been collaborating with the United Nations Environmental Programme and the University of Edinburgh to build Strata, a climate and environmental stress monitor. This provides UNEP teams around the world the ability to answer questions about which locations are experiencing climate and environmental stress. By leveraging the power of the cloud, Strata enables UNEP to effortlessly access the power of satellite intelligence without the need to code. Dashboards provide vital insights into where climate and environmental stresses are occurring and what the causes of those stress might be, without the need for extensive expertise in Earth observation. In our collaboration, we are now in the user testing phase of development with in-country UNEP partners across the planet. Here it is in action. Strata provides users with the ability to select different indicators from thematic areas to help understand different scenarios. In this example, we are looking at where different types of drought may be impacting large numbers of people in Somalia. We are combining satellite data on the weather, climate and vegetation to understand where drought is occurring. Then, by combining this with population data and accessing data on civil unrest through APIs, we can understand the impact this is having on the people in these areas. The dashboard allows users to take a deeper dive into the data to understand more about what is happening. They can look at the contribution of individual indicators and see how these manifest in different regions and districts. By powering Strata, EarthBlox allows stakeholders to make informed decisions and supports climate change adaptation and mitigation. Join us in our journey based on the belief that solving problems with satellite imagery should be simple, powerful, and effortless.
Thanks very much, Sam, and to the EarthBlox team. Fascinating work that you do. Okay, listen, I want to say, first of all, thank you to all our people who've sent in videos so far. I hope you've been enjoying the sessions. I hope you've been enjoying the chat. Keep your questions coming. We're now going to do something a little bit different. Now we're going to have a panel discussion.
Yeah, we have a panel discussion, which is going to be exploring the role of innovation, inclusive growth and collaboration in meeting net zero targets. We've got a fantastic panel for you today.
We're not going to introduce the panel. We're going to introduce the chair of the panel, who's David Henderson, who's the Chief Geospatial Officer at Ordnance Survey, who's going to be looking after the event. So David, nice to see you, nice to meet you. Thank you very, very much for joining us. Perhaps before you introduce the panel, you can introduce yourself. Just tell us a little bit about who you are and the work that you do at Ordnance Survey.
That's great. Thank you, Dallas. And listen, a real pleasure to be here this morning. As you say, a great panel. So I'm going to make this very brief about me and get on to the panel itself, which I'm really excited to be facilitating this morning. My name's David Henderson. As you say, I'm the Chief Geospatial Officer at Ordnance Survey. And this week at COP, and just generally actually, Ordnance Survey have been really advocating the importance of national data infrastructure. Geospatial clearly is the kind of common glue which joins so much data together. And for us at Ordnance Survey and our partners globally, we're really advocating the importance of recognizing that national infrastructure for bringing data together to enable data sharing to be more effective, to be able to release value from the multitude of data that exists for us today. Today, and just being around COP this week, it's really apparent that the amount of conversations that are taking place about the volumes of data that are now available to us, either from space, from geospatial sensors, or just a whole range of different data sets that need to come together. And those themes, I think, are absolutely something that we want to explore in this next panel session. I'm going to ask the speakers to kind of just relate through their own experiences at the moment in terms of enabling climate impact through data. I know we're going to have a conversation about collaboration, which has been a really strong theme here at COP this week, using data perhaps as a vehicle for collaboration. We've got a great panel sitting across private sector, innovation, academic sector, public sector. And I think there's a real interesting theme that we're about to get into about how these different communities work effectively together. So I say we're hoping to have a great conversation with the panel around collaboration, innovation, engaging decision makers in data, which sounds like kind of an odd thing to need to call out. But I think there's no point in having all the data that we have available to us and the insights that we have available if we can't then relate it to decisions and decision making, and hopefully making better decisions. And I think if we can get to the end and feel that together our whole is greater than our sum of parts, then we'll have had a great conversation over the next half hour or so. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first panelist, Mariam Crichton. And just Mariam, I know you've got a few slides to start us off. So if I introduce Mariam and perhaps say a few words about yourself, Mariam, and then maybe just respond to those kind of opening themes. Over to you.
Hello. My name is Mariam Crichton. I'm the Group MD of For Earth Intelligence. For Earth Intelligence, we apply Earth intelligence. So as David was saying, we need to think about the application. For Earth Intelligence vision, 4EI uses space data for the betterment of humans and the planet. How are we doing that? We have a particular focus at 4EI in democratizing space data. And how do we do this? The founders have always set out to transform the way organizations uncover environmental insight. We enable evidence-based intelligence. And we do this, we're powered by space data. We couldn't operate without our brilliant satellite imagery providers. So what do? We our capabilities were predominantly remote sensing Earth observation, but of course now to innovate, we've got artificial intelligence, machine learners, geospatial, digital expertise, and mobile, because they're all needed together for product innovation. And a lot of our product innovation focuses on climate-related products. A couple of examples are we produce hyperlocal air quality models. We use Earth observation in the application of offshore renewables. COP26 very own city, Glasgow, we're very proud to work with Climate Ready Clyde, who uses For Earth's Intelligence Heat Hazard Index to help with their climate adaptation strategy and action plan. Personally, my passion has always been in geo and environmental impact and innovation. So behind the scenes at For Earth Intelligence, what I spend most of my time focusing on is the area of sustainable finance. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Mariam. And there's some great themes there that we'll come back to and pick up in the next few sessions, I'm sure. Ezra, if I can come to you next, to also just maybe just a quick introduction to yourself, and then just lay out some of the sort of common themes that you're pursuing at UKRI.
Sure, thanks, David. Good morning. I'm delighted to be joining the panel discussion today. My name is Ezra Casapola, and I'm the Director of AI and Data Economy at Innovate UK. Innovate UK is the innovation agency of the UK and part of UK Research and Innovation, popularly known as UKRI. UKRI focuses on collaboration to build a thriving and inclusive research and innovation system. Innovate UK helps drive productivity and economic growth by funding and supporting businesses to develop and realize the potential of new ideas, including those from the UK's world-class research base. We fund and connect businesses to the investors, the partners and customers that can help them turn those ideas into commercial successful products and services and business growth, obviously. But we love understanding and helping businesses innovate and deliver truly transformative results for society, economy, and planet. My focus is on the use of cognitive and data technologies that enable the development of solutions and services and harnessing data to tackle specific challenges such as climate change. In order to deliver on our commitments to reach net zero, we are inviting everyone to play their part, share data, and collaborate and work together to transition to sustainable energy systems in the UK and around the globe. Thank you.
Thank you, Ezra, and a great finish there just on this sort of specific note around collaboration, which again we'll come to back very, very soon off the back of that. Rowan, if I can come to you next, I know you particularly wanted to draw out some of the work you're involved in mission-oriented innovation, and perhaps just give a bit of colour to that now so that we can dive into that more in a few minutes.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be on this panel. My name, as you say, is Rowan Conway. I'm the head of the Mission-Oriented Innovation Network at the UCL Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose. I work closely with the Institute's founder, the economist Mariana Mazzucato, and my role is to convene our policy network and work on collaborative policy lab projects. And we do this in a very applied way in institutions and governments around the world, so both in the UK, but Moyne brings together nearly 100 global agencies from government departments, innovation agencies and advanced research and project agencies to cities, so more complex environments to work in. And the role that we do is to bring them together to share the challenges about and opportunities they face when trying to nurture what we're seeing here as transformational innovation, you know, the kind of innovation that solves public problems. So what I've learned actively working alongside policymakers around the world, we try to translate this new theory of innovation, mission-oriented innovation, which is not exactly that new, but it's now very urgently needed. We work closely with policy practitioners, and I've worked personally with, for example, the government of New Zealand, the province of British Columbia in Canada, the government and its innovation agencies in Denmark and Sweden, to inform innovation policies that enable governments and their public institutions to proactively shape markets and create public value or a new account of public value and pursue missions. So it's important to note, and I'm really interested to get into the kind of nuts and bolts of how you work with data scientists and complex partnerships, but it's important to note that mission-oriented innovation, or indeed transformational innovation, as a concept and policy frame, quite fundamentally requires that we rethink the machinery of government to play more than a passive market fixing role and understand how to steer the direction of innovation. Mariana's book, Mission Economy, talks about this in quite a lot of depth and describes the kind of policy framework around mission-oriented innovation policy and how that helps to organize investment. You know, Manali talked about, well, we need to reorient finance. Reorientation is really actually very challenging. So how to organize investment into challenge-driven innovation. Mission-oriented innovation should be able to play that kind of connecting tissue or connecting framework between rhetoric and action. You know, we've been talking about, you know, a little less conversation, a little more action. Well, sometimes you can feel this sort of analysis paralysis, like, well, how do I actually do anything? So getting from this political agenda setting, which is right at that top level, which COP is all about, to getting into something that's more clear and targeted and specific around missions, and then to how you're going to do that, thinking about these interdisciplinary or cross-sectoral innovation portfolios of projects. And before I pass back to the rest of the panel, I think it's really important that we discuss in this session that this is not a simple pivot. You know, missions present a new way to understand innovation. And so critically, they need new tools, new rules, and new ways to approach this collaboration, because traditional competition-oriented innovation, you know, if we just left innovation to try and move fast towards the net zero challenge, you know, innovation policy in this instance is just economic policy. It's purely growth focused, following on enabling advanced technologies, with the goal being increased competitive exports, etc. There's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but having an explicit purpose or direction, and apologies for my weird voice, I've got a cough, towards like the green innovation changes the innovation trajectory. So it's not a simple case of efficiency and scale. And Manali said earlier, we're at this point of we need to get into action. So we're currently operating, I think, in a world of double speak, where we can where it looks like we can grip this decarbonisation challenge and just reorient or pivot our existing innovation tools towards the race to net zero without changing any underpinning systems and economic tools, which is not true. So the work to decarbonise and move from fossil fuels is a profoundly complex challenge. So we need entry points that don't just copy or, you know, are a facsimile of our existing innovation systems. We need to think about how we work together towards common goals as a goal of innovation. And so collaboration is key, and I'm really excited for this conversation.
Thank you ever so much. I mean, I think there's so much in there to kind of unpack, and I almost feel that with each of you, because you're all representing such amazing areas of work, that we could almost have 45 minutes on each area. But I think that really close link that you're making between innovation and collaboration, and the changes in that domain is something we must come back to and just explore in more detail. And then last but absolutely not least, Felicity, good morning, welcome to the panel. You're leading within the public sector an amazing group of people to explore some really important aspects of our data infrastructure at large. So good morning, and over to you to just make a few opening remarks and introduce yourself.
Morning, and thank you for the introduction. So my name is Felicity Birch, and I am the Executive Director of the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, which is CDEI. So we are part of the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, and we are a government expert body, the first of its kind in the world. And we are, to Rowan's point, actually very much a new way of promoting innovation by working directly with government departments, public sector bodies, and the private sector to find new ways to share data and to build trust. And the centre uses a range of approaches to do this, but mostly it's through a partnership model and through public engagement, as well as sort of technical understanding of the technologies that we need to sort of implement these new models. And we are guided by a really excellent advisory board of world-leading experts on AI, data and ethics. So we all know that data and digital technologies can play a key role in addressing climate change. And I'm so excited that we've got this panel here today, because I do think it plays quite a vital sort of underpinning role in a lot of this discussion. Things like digital technology, smart meters, supercomputers, weather modelling could combined deliver quite a serious proportion of the carbon emission reductions that are needed. But in order to do this, we need to build a reliable and comprehensive data infrastructure, and we also need to give individuals and businesses the confidence to share their data, that their data is going to be used in a way that they trust, when you're a business, if it's commercially sensitive data, that there is proper protection around that. And so I think that's a really key thing for us, around all this excitement that I think the use of data rightly generates. And, if there is anything in this landscape that we can be optimistic about, I really do think data offers many, many opportunities here. But in the race to use it sort of better and faster, we need to think firstly about the outcomes and make sure that technology is going to benefit society, but also when we're using it, that we're using it in a way that reflects public values. And there's been a lot of talk this morning about sort of radical transparency and sort of building public trust, and you absolutely have to do those two things hand in hand. We have seen plenty of examples of data use that's gone wrong, and it really sticks in the public consciousness when that happens. So it's not just about building trust in data, but actually building trustworthy data use that gives individuals the confidence to share their information, and organizations the sort of ability to share with each other in a way that they sort of feel safe and confident to do that, and enable that sort of future that we all want to deliver. So collaboration absolutely at the key, at the heart of this for us as CDEI.
Felicity, thanks so much for your opening remarks as well. And look, I mean, just as a kind of an opening question, and it might be just almost a little bit of a recap and reframing for the conversation, because I think you've all mentioned collaboration in different ways, and almost starting from the kind of linking of expert capabilities through to decision makers, and almost at the end, Felicity, you were talking about the general public, citizen engagement, and particularly in the context of climate action, just how important that's going to be over the next 10 years. I just wondered whether you could perhaps all expand a little bit on the role of collaboration in supporting our net zero ambitions, just how important those kind of collaboration networks are going to be. I think I heard earlier on the kind of the notion, Rowan, of moving away from almost experts on single points of delivery and forming different types of collaborative networks. And what a wonderful group we have this morning between public, private, academic, innovation sectors to perhaps explore that. Rowan, can I come perhaps to you first, just to kind of pick up that theme, and just how important is collaboration to supporting our net zero ambitions?
Well, I think collaboration will be the difference between, rhetoric and reality. So if you don't, we can all put our pivot very simply by changing our language or our blurb, but then that can very quickly fall into greenwashing when you can't change it into any or translate it into any kind of action. And so I think collaboration can also suffer from the challenge of the blurred conceit of, well, that's an unalloyed good in its own right, and actually it needs strategic leadership as well. So because collaboration won't happen without that kind of clarity of leadership, because we can get all our ducks in a row, we can have everyone working, we can have the multidisciplinary team, but if they run up against some challenges within the existing system or infrastructure, that can derail that team from actually delivering. So I think it's useful to try and disaggregate it as part of a system of collaboration, which requires leadership, it requires convening, it requires a kind of portfolio mindset, which enables us to think more broadly than this kind of stay in lane. Sometimes we use this sort of race mentality, which means that I'll stay in my lane, I am the, part of the ecosystem, I'll do my bit, you do your bit. It's some kind of relay race. I'm painting a picture of a terrible Olympics here, but ultimately, we don't get stray out of our lane. Now, the challenges of the 21st century are not a single journey. That you can't deploy that kind of race-like model to trying to solve these extremely complex challenges. And at the same time, you've got to do stuff, right? Because you can't just keep saying, let's keep working the narrative. And when all of the things that Manali was just talking about are absolutely stark, they need action. But tackling the challenges of the 21st century won't be a single journey to net zero. That's the first thing I think we need to understand when we do collaboration, because that helps us kind of stand back a little bit from saying, my role is this, I work with you, we do this, the data will be great, we'll have this kind of multi-layered map and it will solve things. Ultimately, you will need a portfolio of different kinds of projects. Some of them will be messier than others. It's a really key point that Michael Grubb points out in planetary economics, which is, some innovation moves faster than others. Not everything is going to be able to be solved in a very tight time frame. And I think that sometimes the idea of a race team or a SWAT team who's going to deliver on something, that can work on something, a transformational collaborative that's trying to deliver something in a short period of time. I talked to you previously about the idea that, when we were trying to deal with CFCs, that was the kind of thing we knew the problem was clear. We could bring together a complex array of different kinds of scientists and innovators and the private sector to work out how we're going to solve this problem. Not all problems look like that. And, trying to certainly do things like decarbonize concrete and then manage completely reorient supply chains, that's a really difficult innovation challenge. It will take a number of years. I've got such a lovely voice with this sore throat, sorry. So to be able to do that requires that there is leadership that can navigate different types of innovation, doesn't seek to get to this very simple efficiency and scale, just reorient the finance and net zero will emerge. It won't. That's part of it. You need to reorient the finance away from obviously bad stuff and into cleaner stuff. But then there is far more complex collaborations. And I think there's a member of our Moyne network, NYSERDA, which is the regional investment portfolio for clean energy in New York region, does a really great job of this, of actually minding this wide portfolio that includes social justice programs over here, but also is looking at carbon capture and storage and trying to do this, manage risk in a whole new way. So I think collaborations need to be able to deal with extreme complexity, if you like.
Yeah, I was on a panel actually last night speaking alongside the Met Office, and we were exploring the kind of the interdependency between very many of these challenges. And of course, I think your swim lane analogy works really well for me, because these lanes can't sit in isolation because they are related in one way or another. And I think I said at the start something around the whole being greater than the sum of the parts. And I think it's a really important theme for us to be able to draw out. And Felicity, you were nodding profusely to some of those comments, as if you wanted to almost immediately come back on some of them, contribute. Any comments from yourself?
I think I was actually mainly nodding at the sore throat, because I can sympathise with Rowan. I'm suffering from one as well. But no, I joke. I think that there was a lot of that in there that I really agree with, but also so much of it that translates to the sort of real world experience that we're having at CDEI about how you make collaborations work really well. And I think it's it's very easy to come onto a panel and sort of say collaboration is really valuable, we need to do more of it. It's another thing to sort of translate that into collaboration that's really effective in practice. And I think that it becomes particularly important when we are looking at sort of big systemic challenges like net zero and that transition, because it is going to require really ambitious, collaborative, very likely challenge-led innovation effort. And I thought it might just be helpful to share some of the things that we're sort of learning at CDEI about what's making collaborations more effective, and in particular what's helping people sort of feel confident with their data use. And one of the things that's actually hugely important is around sort of building that trustworthy governance. So it's like, what are the rules of the game that you are playing together? You know, you bring collaborators together and it's all very nice to just be like, well, won't it be lovely? We'll work together really well. But actually you need to kind of put the rules of engagement in place. And that's one of the things that we've been looking at CDEI. So a slightly different challenge, but I think it's quite an interesting example. We know that one of the priority issues that government is trying to tackle, certainly at DCMS, is online safety, and how do we keep people safe online. And one of the kind of interesting challenges here is that there's a real potential for yes, technology has created some of the challenges, but there's also the potential for technology to create some of the solutions to online safety. The challenge is a lot of the data that matters for online safety is either it's owned by very large companies and it's their commercially sensitive data, or it is highly private, highly personally sensitive data. So there's lots and lots of questions for individuals and for companies about whether they want to share that. So one of the things that we have been working with the industry on is how do you build the governance structures? So looking at things like privacy enhancing technologies, looking at data intermediation, how do you build the governance structures that actually enable people to share that data in a way that they are comfortable with? And creates that sort of future innovation. Now, obviously, that's not a climate change specific example, but it is a really specific problem that needed solving, that we knew technology was an answer to, or could provide an answer to, and we needed to put that structure in place. So I think that that's a role, certainly when it comes to data ethics, that CDEI is here to play. But I think it's quite an important role to think about when you're entering into any collaboration. It's what are the rules of the game here? How do we make this collaboration work really well? And how do we think about not just the outcome that we're trying to achieve, but delivering that outcome in a way that reflects public values and the values of the institutions that are getting involved in the collaboration.
And I think something which you didn't directly kind of call out there, I guess, is almost the kind of sense one of the questions that that are being posed by our wider audience about the kind of barriers that exist to effective use of data, if I can put it that broadly. And I think, you know, I mean, I sense it. There's an enormous collaborative spirit which exists, and maybe to Rowan's point about the kind of swimming in parallel swim lanes, on one level, a real collaborative spirit, as long as you stay in your swim lane and I stay in mine. To Ezra, I just wondered whether you wanted to pick up a little bit of that and discuss some of those barriers shortly, and perhaps, you know, encourage us to think through an optimistic lens as to, you know, where are we seeing the great examples of where these barriers are being knocked down, and we're seeing collaborative spirits come through into new communities taking action.
Thanks, David. I think I concur with all the points that my colleagues made, and we really need radical collaboration and really get everyone engaged from every part of every strata of, you know, society. Really look what we are doing, really impacting, you know, the positives and the negatives, and really increase the consciousness and awareness of people. And fundamentally, we need the hearts and minds into this. And the world needs decisive action at every level to change the trajectory of ever increasing emissions. We are going to have more demand for the energy systems. You know, we will, the population is growing, but equally we need to understand what are the interventions that we can do to remove the emissions, so in order to reach the net zero game that we are playing here, which is going to be fundamentally, you know, life-threatening if we don't act today. And there's a need for a new type of economy and society and shift that we need to achieve towards this nature positive net zero economies to safeguard our futures. It's not going to happen. We need to not think about if and whens, it's already happening. So we need everyone engaged. And we will have to bring the people together and communities along on this journey to address the wants and the needs, and also, tackle the fears. Otherwise, in order to do that, we need to leverage the behavioral sciences, social sciences, and humanities, because we need everyone from citizens, the public, the NGOs, the businesses, private sector, everyone, consumers to get engaged. I think to enable collaboration, there's an opportunity for us also to resolve these perception issues, which are some of the barriers that we are facing, and provide clear and consistent and more targeted communication to increase this awareness, consciousness. And obviously, I'll pick up on the innovation idea. We need to drive this human-centered, design-led, mission-oriented innovation so we can propel everyone towards a common purpose, and obviously help governments and business to respond to this climate crisis in an impactful way. We have to get on with this and get immediately on these actions together. That's my message, and thank you.
Actually, what a fantastic segue to Mariam, actually, because I think, Mariam, you wrote some really compelling blog articles over the summer, which were great to read at the time, because I think there was a real action orientation in your spirit and the work that you're involved with. I mean, in the spirit of kind of knocking down some of those barriers to collaboration and using data to kind of bring communities together that results in action taking, I just wondered if you could expand upon that from your own experiences.
Well, to your initial point, how do we help the transition to net zero? I represent the private sector and particularly Earth observation. So there are traditional and powerful businesses that, by the very nature of their day-to-day activities, cause harm to the climate and the environment. And I believe it is our role to support them in their transition to net zero. And we need to not just get involved with technology, but in helping them to pivot their business models and move to more sustainable practices. So to illustrate that on a practical level, why am I getting involved with sustainable finance? And I'm a technologist in geospatial. I believe to make real change comes from the people in power. People in power are the people with money. So what I'm trying to do really is gamify how people make money so that the finances and capital can flow towards protective activities as opposed to harmful activities. So the manner in which we collaborate for Earth observation companies in space is incredibly important, because our value proposition is transparency and evidence. This can be seen as a threat to companies. So the manner in how we work and collaborate with the powerful companies is critical so that we're not pushed away. To give a very practical example of what the panel has been talking about, I'm trying to innovate in solutions for sustainable finance. What does that mean? We rely on the upstream space sector, who put the satellites into the sky, and then the downstream sector, who have remote sensors, who make sense of this data. We can't function past that point. We need that. And then we need to, well, one of the barriers, which I could go on about barriers, is in the geospatial sector particularly, innovate. We need to produce products and insights, valuable insights that are completely tailored to this sustainable finance sector. So an example would be a product innovation team needs to be finance knowledge, have natural scientists, have mainstream technologists, have Earth observation specialists, have that design thinking, have the social impact understanding in order to create useful insights. And at each touch point there, that's the collaboration between all of them, and understanding that whole ecosystem is really important. And when the insights get to the investors and they are investing in companies, they need to be open to using these brand new insights and wanting to innovate themselves in how they make investment decisions. That in turn will push the companies they invest in, such as the corporates who we're talking about here, to think about ESG, environmental, social governance, in line with just making profit, which in turn will encourage companies to reduce harmful activities to our planet, which will help us reach net zero. And in talking about barriers, again, I'm focused on product innovation, geospatial and space, which, hopefully most of the people here are watching. I think that if you listen to finance talks, they say the technology is not ready yet. It is ready. We've got some amazing data from the satellite providers now, incredibly high resolution. So it's there. However, many argue the resolutions needed for climate solutions are not affordable. And I think one of the biggest barriers we face in geospatial is we're struggling to strategically commoditize space data. We're not putting enough emphasis on tailoring with all this tech and all this data, but we're not tailoring it to practical, real-world climate solutions that's needed. And I feel like the biggest barrier is product innovation. And one of the barriers there is where we are at this point of time, there is a disconnect between data collection and application, because there is a lack of product skills and product knowledge and solid innovation process and growth plans to make things actually happen. Even the biggest companies in our entire space and geospatial sector have only hired product people in the last year. And one of the barriers, I think, is in geospatial, there is a lack of diversity, and that has created an echo chamber effect, which means it's not conducive for new ideas, and we need to start hiring out of our sector and working with people out of our sector in order to understand what's really needed.
Mariam, thank you so much. I think that's a great kind of call out of some of the changes that, well, hopefully we're already witnessing actually, but I think a real sort of call out of the importance of following through on that. And I think there's been a useful sort of segue from sort of collaboration into innovation and in that last session. And when we talk about innovation, we most often think of, I guess, incremental change. And the spirit of this week, taking climate action, is one where we're in a world now where we're not talking about incremental change. We're talking about really significant step change. And what I just heard you really champion there, Mariam, was that not only is the use case changing in a significant way, but our capabilities, and perhaps I'm with you in the geospatial sector, the geospatial and space-led capabilities are so much bigger as well. I just wonder whether, to achieve that broader transformational change, it requires, again, a different way of working, perhaps. I think, the analogy earlier on of the parallel swim lanes, Felicity, from your engagement work particularly, I wondered if you could speak to that kind of recognition of both the use case have evolved significantly, data-led capabilities have evolved significantly. What therefore needs to happen in order to kind of access that value, release that transformational capability?
Yeah, and I'm really be pleased to talk about the public engagement aspect of this, because ultimately for me, the purpose of CDEI is about enabling innovation, but it's about doing that in a way that delivers things that the public care about in a way that the public want it to be delivered. And actually, for innovation to be seen as ethical, to be seen as trustworthy by the general public, for them to be happy to share their data, there are a few things that really matter. And actually, one of the things that makes a big difference to whether the public feel comfortable with innovation happening or not is that it is designed to deliver an outcome that they really care about. And things like climate change, health outcomes, etc., are sort of, pretty worthy outcomes that many people will get behind. Some of the other things that matter in terms of public trust, though, are also the institution that is doing the innovating. Is it an institution that they trust? Typically, there is more trust with the public sector than with the private sector, though there's a fair degree of granularity within that. And then there are questions about, well, what's the kind of data that I'm sharing, and essentially, like, to what extent do I feel like I'm being snooped on? So people don't mind generally sharing quite high level data about themselves, but when it comes to, well, what time did I have a friend over at my house, that sort of thing starts to feel a bit creepy, and people feel unhappy about that. But the fundamental and the biggest thing that matters, and I've already talked about it a bit, is that people really trust that there are the right governance structures in place and that their data is being treated properly. But let me just apply this to that sort of wider question that you're asking about sort of this potential for innovation to deliver at scale and deliver really transformative change, because these things absolutely have to go hand in hand with each other. And one of the reasons it's really important that we're talking about data is because data-driven innovation absolutely opens up the possibility to deliver innovation at scale, really scalable, really big outcomes. But if we're going to do that, we need to do it ethically. And I think one example is a sector that we're working with a bit at the centre at the moment is looking at autonomous vehicles. So autonomous vehicles open up a really big opportunity to generate significant data on travel. Tracking information from autonomous vehicles could give us all sorts of information about where to place charging stations, where we build roads, how we design public transport to sort of fill in any gaps, etc. And we can merge that data, we can link that data in a way that is beneficial for society, that will help us address challenges around net zero and potentially other challenges that relate to people's well-being as well. But there are ethical risks and there are commercial risks. Is it okay to share detailed location data about individuals and their behaviors? How do you share that across companies? How do you protect the IP that's being developed? Which information should there be legal requirements to share? What information should it be sort of okay to hold on to? And all of this is really difficult to do without the right data standards. So I think the headline here is that it's really, there's lots of great opportunity for data-driven innovation. But to that point about sort of doing it in line with sort of public attitudes, I think that it is something that organizations innovating in this space need to take really seriously, because the risk is you get this wrong and it undermines sort of individuals' willingness to share their own data and sort of companies' willingness to collaborate with each other as well.
Yeah, and firstly, that last piece you were talking about really resonates with me. We've been involved really closely with in the UK with the Benchmark initiative, which Ordnance Survey Geovation and many people on this call will be familiar with, and having partnered really closely with American Geo, the Locust Charter this year being published with a set of principles which are really intended to reinforce many of the things you talked there, to encourage a better conversation actually about many of these things, because there isn't an immediate right or wrong answer, but it does require better understanding about the relationship between ethics, privacy, and our comfort actually with the way in which data is used going forward. Listen, I just got one kind of last kind of closing opportunity for you all to kind of leave us with a remark. And I think, what a fantastic panel this morning. You're all amazing champions for better use of data in a kind of collaborative, innovative spirit, and particularly important this week when we're talking about taking climate action as a space and geospatial industry. I just wondered if there was, from your own perspective, look back in 5 years' time, and we hope to be proud by what we've done and what we've achieved, and how that's led to better decision making. Just perhaps as a short closing remark from you all, just what would be that one sort of success that you'd love to be able to look back on in 5 years' time and say, that seemed difficult 5 years ago, but I'm so proud of what we've achieved together. And maybe Rowan, if I can come to you first.
Sure. I've been trying to work up how do I build on the fact that you like this swim lane thing. So I'm going to use my final opportunity to try and advance that little image. In the kind of what is it to have multi-actor collaboration, we are quite used to gathering so that individuals stay around a table and they represent their body and they do the best thing that they can to represent their excellence in their field. Now, we all need to maybe get a little bit more messy. And so, in our current system, we work with swim lanes and our default is to stay in lane. There is, unfortunately, some unlearning and new learning to be done. One in the unlearning is trying to work out how to be a bit more messy and not feel like a complete failure in the system. But then I'm going to try and aggregate that, given what the panel has said, into these 3 different spaces. The first one is thinking about finance, because I think finance likes to see itself as super frictionless. We will just reorient all of our portfolios, will go to net zero, and Bob's your uncle. Now market and supply chain, supply me with my net zero. As Mariam says, then there's people like Mariam working her socks off trying to deliver against this, which is a ridiculous thing. They need to get in. And so the swim lane in finance, they need to be more Adam Peaty and move from swimming gold in Tokyo to 7th place in Strictly, because you need to be able to do your different stuff. You can't just say, I want more, Tokyo golds, when ultimately what we need is more, fancy footwork. So recognize finance is not just muscle and speed. It needs to build its dexterity, both its mental and physical dexterity, and innovate its portfolios. As I say, I think NYSERDA is a great example of that. Some of that will be imperfect, and we need to work out how to have the political will and capacity of financiers to go, oh my goodness, that's a complete failure then, and go, no, actually, maybe it's not. Maybe some things will take deep patient finance for us to get somewhere. Now, in terms of our innovation collaborations and the kind of things we were talking about, multi-actor collaborations, we need a step change in our innovations understanding. And so our swim lane analogy there is net zero will take many lanes, maybe the entire pool. And we need to be able to maybe just take all the barriers out.
Rowan, that's great. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to finalize say, and so the step change in government is this transformational capability. They need to stray from lane, and that will be hard, but we need to be able to ensure that there is space for them to do that.
Rowan, thank you, and apologies, I didn't mean to cut you off just at the end there, and I'm just conscious of the main session, looking back to get to plenary. So just a really quick closing remark. I mean, Ezra, from your perspective, look back in 5 years' time, what are you proud of?
Yeah, funding will be key. And I think we have a huge way to achieve, but we are on it, to bring everyone, convene every actor in the ecosystems across all value chains to create this system of systems thinking. And cognitive diversity will be key. So if I look back and I just say, this is what we achieved that we brought all the technologies, converged them together, tailored them for the practical uses to address key industry and challenges like net zero, climate change, environmental issues, aspects that we will all tackle. So coming together is, for me, key. The skill sets, the mindsets, and the tool set to create this valuable, designed and desirable impact on the triple bottom line, which is the people, profit, and planet. And we will look back and just say, okay, we have done this work together, everyone involved across in the UK and across the globe. And we have achieved the targets that we set out for ourselves. And we keep everyone responsible, because everyone and each one of us is responsible, and they are going to be the leaders of the future. So, radical transparency brings real responsibility for everyone of us, one of us.
Thank you. And then very quickly, just the same question, Mariam, to yourself, and then Felicity.
I'd like to have 2 points on a point on innovation. I don't believe in technology-led innovation or data-driven innovation. I believe in market-led innovation. And I think the failure of Earth observation geospatial to date has been we keep doing science experiments because we get excited about technology, but we need to look at what people actually need and want. I'd like to say that the single best current example of global collaboration I see in geospatial is the Women in Geospatial group, where there are thousands of women growing by the day who cross continent, Africa, Asia, Europe, America, cross seniority, cross culture, cross language, are united as one. And to bring that essence into climate is what we need, that supportive and celebration culture. And my final point would be, we are introducing innovative and sophisticated solutions because we've forgotten how to live simply.
Very good. Thank you, Mariam, and some really important statements to close there. And just Felicity, I'm sorry for just encouraging a quick remark at the end, but just from yourself, where would you want to look back from in 5 years?
I'll do my best. So CDEI is a relatively new organisation, and we have a new purpose focused on this partnership model and really actively helping people to deliver impactful innovation in an ethical way. And I think that net zero climate change is clearly an area where we can have a lot of impact. So I would certainly like to see CDEI playing a key role in tackling this challenge, but we can't do it without all of you. We need partners with problems. So if you do have a data sharing challenge that you want to work through and you think can make a big difference between to net zero, please get in touch, because we would be delighted to talk to you and see if it's something we can help with.
Felicity, thank you. Listen, this is one of these panels that could go on for a long time. The conversation's so rich, and I'm sure many of these conversations are going to stay with us beyond this fortnight and into the coming years. And thank you ever so much for being so aspirational in your closing remarks, because it stands us in good stead for the next few years. Dallas,
yes.
Suzie, I'm going to hand back to you.
Well, you don't need to. You can just sort of carry on all day. In fact, you should have a whole separate 2 weeks, like a separate kind of like.
What a great panel.
27, which is just you guys talking. Honestly, that was the most riveting, fascinating panel discussion. Well, first of all, David, thank you very much for chairing it so beautifully. But thank you very much for all your amazing contributions. I will be forever thinking about swim lanes and Rowan's swim lanes and Adam Peaty. Actually, Rowan, one thing that you pointed out, which I think sort of underlines everything, is just how complicated the modern world is. You can't just turn the tap off and expect everything just to happen. So much of the modern world is so invested in the way that we've done things in the past, and sort of ripping it all apart just doesn't work. And I think we often forget that. So thank you very much for that. And thank you for all your comments. Absolutely brilliant. Brilliant. But we have to move on. Suzie? I think
we do have to move on. Yes, sadly.
Exciting things.
Yes, we're moving on to a presentation by GHGSat and Stéphane Germain. And they are interested or involved in an operational satellite system which measures greenhouse gas emissions at facility level. And they're going to give a brief introduction to that up next.
My name is Stéphane Germain, and I'm the CEO at GHGSat. GHGSat was started 10 years ago with a vision of bringing global transparency to greenhouse gas emissions. We use our own satellites to monitor greenhouse gas emissions from industrial facilities anywhere in the world. We do that at very high resolution and with a very low detection threshold, so that we can find emissions anywhere in the world and attribute them to individual sources and ultimately to the operators of those sources, so we can help them better understand, control, and eventually reduce their emissions. We launched our first satellite, Claire, over 5 years ago. We then took everything we learned from that first satellite and applied it to our second and third satellites that were launched in 2020 and 2021. We're measuring emissions every day, from coal mines, from oil and gas facilities, from landfills, and from other industrial facilities that emit methane all over the world. Oil and gas, for example, can emit methane in many different ways. Many of them are actually quite large and can be detected from space and have a significant total impact on emissions globally from the oil and gas industry. Coal mining emissions we see in many places in the world. The emissions come from vents, which are taking the methane that is produced underground during mining. We see landfill emissions in the United States, in Canada, virtually in every part of the world. Landfill emissions, when there is no gas collection system, are some of the largest emissions we see in the world. There are many different kinds of satellites that orbit the Earth every day. There are satellites that are designed by national agencies to monitor the planet every day. There are other satellites that are designed to look at the surface of the Earth with much higher resolution. It's the combination of those two types of satellites together, the collaboration between scientific teams, the collaboration between public entities and private entities that are together bringing all of this data now to bear for the benefit of the fight against climate change. We take our own satellite measurements and combine them with third-party satellite measurements to provide an even better service to our customers and to the international community. We work very closely, for example, with the European Space Agency and with Sentinel-5P or TRPOMI. Bringing public satellites together with private satellites can lead to great results. In 2019, we worked with the team at ESRON, the Netherlands Institute for Space Research, and the TRPOMI satellite working with GHGSat were able to analyze emissions from a region of Turkmenistan. In this region, we identified very large emissions of methane. We brought that data to the attention of the operator and the regulator in the country, and ultimately to diplomatic entities from several different governments that were able to work together with the national government to ultimately lead to a mitigation or a reduction of the emissions of that facility. That kind of cooperation leads to great results. The emissions that were mitigated from that one source represented over 1 million cars taken off the road for 1 year. The performance of our satellites is now thoroughly validated. We've conducted our own tests and we've worked with third parties to demonstrate that we can detect and quantify the emissions of methane from various sources at different times of year and in different places around the world. We use our own satellite data combined with public satellite data to create maps of the world like the one behind me. Pulse is a map that we make available publicly for free, which is updated every week and shows methane concentrations around the world. So Pulse is just one contribution that GHGSat makes to the public good in sharing our satellite data with the world. Satellite monitoring of greenhouse gas emissions is here now. It is available not just for private companies, not just for local government regulators, but also for the international community to understand truly what the emissions are on a global scale. That kind of information will allow international collaborators, those developing international policies, agreements, and setting new goals to have the data they need to truly understand where we're starting from and the goals we want to set for ourselves, the goals we want to achieve together in reducing methane globally.
Thanks very much, Stefan and the team for that. That's excellent. In 5 minutes or so, we're going to hear from Arji Kavada from NASA. She's an earth scientist and the lead for Sustainable Development Goals at NASA. We're going to be having a chat with her. But before that, we've got one more short video, and this is from Anthony Baker, who's the CEO of SatelliteVu, another innovative company, who are going to outline what it is that they do.
Hello, I'm Anthony Baker, CEO of SatelliteVu. SatelliteVu is going to launch a small constellation of Earth observation satellites that can detect the heat emissions from any building on the planet. This is really useful for finding where in the world we're wasting all the energy. I'm going to talk to you today about our collaboration with industry in order to fulfill our mission. Buildings contribute 40% of all carbon emissions. And everybody who's declaring net zero has the same problem. They don't know their footprint now, They don't know where to spend their first money to make things better. And did it work over the long term? SatelliteVu has an answer. SatelliteVu satellites can measure the heat emissions in Beijing, London, San Francisco, all with the same measurement technique, all with a trusted source. SatelliteVu is essentially the Earth's thermometer. We're using an infrared sensor, and infrared's a completely different category of Earth observation data. You might be familiar with optical on mapping applications, and there's also radar that helps you see through clouds. But infrared gives you an inference of what's going on inside a building. We essentially open up the box so you can see what's going on inside. Our satellite gets launched next year, but in the meantime, we've built a copy of our camera that's going into space and putting it on an aeroplane and collecting real live data. Here you can see some typical images of industrial complexes, so you immediately see where the energy is being wasted and perhaps it can be reused. Or in the built environment, we can see which houses need upgrading from thermal insulation. Or in the river courses, we can see where energy is being dumped into the river, which could be pollution. Also, we take multiple images throughout the day and night, so you can see how things are changing, and that gives you unique intelligence on what exactly is going on. Our partners are investors, technology partners, and commercial partners. Obviously, our investors help fund all this, but their knowledge of the industry and their connections have also been paramount in our success to date. Our technology partners help us design the technology and remove the bugs, so we know this is going to work. And with our commercial partners, they're the ones that are going to use the pixels, use the data, and get commercial benefit from it. For example, we've been working with Landmark Group, and they're very interested in building intelligence, finding out which buildings are emitting energy and might be needing upgrade, or looking at the characterization of buildings. We're also working with the University of Stirling, in fact, Scotland's International Environmental Centre. This is a pioneering collaboration that will create an innovation community in the Forth Valley, driving the creation of a net zero regional economy and acting as a global example of low carbon growth. Typically with these commercial partners, we fly our plane, collect unique data, and they can ground truth that with ground measurements, and from there derive information which cannot otherwise be discerned without satellite data. The flights are ongoing this year, and the satellite's under construction for delivery next year. After that, we will launch a further 6 satellites, and then our constellation will be complete. In summary, SatelliteVu is bringing a high-resolution thermal imagery and video to detect what's going on inside buildings and where we're wasting all our energy. We're collaborating with partners, driving the adoption and development of new and novel applications of our data. And we're going to be ready to fly in 2022. So if you're interested, please look at our website or follow us on LinkedIn. Thank you.
Wow, fascinating to hear about some of the work done by our colleagues at SatelliteVu there. Now, next up, a panel I've really been looking forward to today, or a discussion I've been looking forward to today, which is with Arji Kavada. She's Earth scientist at NASA and lead for the Sustainable Development Goals there. Arji, welcome.
Hello, Suzie. Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here. And I'm glad to have the opportunity to conclude this fantastic session. So today I wanted to share a brief presentation and some thoughts about the role of earth science and earth science derived knowledge to help countries and relevant stakeholders across the world monitor progress and also achieve sustainable development. And also with a focus on looking at efforts to build communities' resilience to different impacts relating to climate change. And let's get started. So first of all, I know we've heard a lot today and throughout these past several days about ongoing efforts by different stakeholders across government, academia, the private sector, NGOs, civil society, to create a more sustainable future. And so when it comes to that, we are all in this together. And you can see here, there have been several landmark agreements that have marked this consensus. Of course, the Paris Climate Accord, the Sustainable Development Goals, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, the New Urban Agenda, among others. And so all of these agreements really highlight the need for data, including geospatial information and Earth observation data, to help stakeholders not only track and monitor how they're doing and progressing toward achieving related targets, but to also support and inform decisions, ongoing adjustments that are necessary to better manage and move toward related goals and targets. And so in the next few slides, I will highlight some examples of where earth science information and derived knowledge is currently put to use, and also talk about some opportunities where we can be doing more to further accelerate the use of earth science insights to deliver societal benefits through collaboration across sectors and also across levels, both domestic and internationally, through interdisciplinarity, in addition to open science and open knowledge principles to really make sure that no one is left behind. And so starting from here, sharing some examples of different types of Earth observations. So Earth observations enable us to have this synoptic view about our planet, which is critical to understanding how the different components of the Earth system, so our land, the atmosphere, our oceans, ice, are changing and are working together as a result of both natural and human caused changes and activities. And so both NASA and many other international space agencies measure these changes of the different components of the Earth system from space as well as from air and land, with a fleet of satellites, airborne and ground-based instruments. And here you see some of those examples. For instance, we can track the growth of cities and changes in farmlands or forests over several years or decades. We can also use observations from space to better infer and understand the distribution and impact of different types of aerosols at regional and global scales. And large forest fires can also be mapped from space, allowing people on the ground to see a much larger area than what we can see from the ground. And so tracking also global temperature trends provides a critical indicator of the impact of human activity, specifically greenhouse gas emissions on our planet. And here you can see this projection of change in global surface temperature anomalies this extends through 2020. And so it's important to note that Earth's average temperature has risen more than 2 degrees Fahrenheit or 1.2 degrees Celsius since the late 19th century. And so we use this information to really help understand those changes and also quantify the human effects and forcing to this ascending temperature trend. Now, because the Earth is an integrated system, a forcing on one side results in changes somewhere else. And so this visualization here reveals that the Earth system comprises different components that interact in complex ways. For example, heat absorbed by the oceans is transported by ocean currents. Heat and moisture from the ocean and land influence Earth's weather patterns, and precipitation significantly impacts water availability. And all these forcings impact plant growth on land and chlorophyll concentrations in the oceans. And so we can use this great information that we can get from space to better understand how these different components of our planet evolve through time and how they also work together and interact with each other. The one additional slide I wanted to share here is this NASA Earth fleet. So this is the Earth observing satellite fleet that NASA operates. It involves about 19 satellites that look at our planet multiple times per day, in addition to instruments that are installed in the International Space Station. And so it is important to note that international and interagency collaboration is key here. And so NASA works with intergovernmental and international organizations like the Group on Earth Observations and the Committee on Earth Observation Satellites to help share and develop joint missions, share data, and also earth science applications and research to optimize societal benefit and help support decisions across organizations and levels. And so in the next few slides, I want to share some examples of such efforts. And so we will look at both some tools as well as some specific applications that are working across sectors to deliver impact on the ground. And we'll just go to the previous slide for a moment. Perfect. So to begin with, I wanted to share a few examples of a couple of tools here that you can see that help us understand and track climate change, so sea level changes here, as well as wildfires across the globe. So what you see at the top, and there was a small animation there, is the NASA Sea Level Projection tool that allows users to visualize and download global and regional sea level projection data from 2020 to 2150, along with how these projections can differ based on different scenarios. And so this is quite important. So understanding how future sea level rise may change is critical for coastal planners and policymakers that are trying to understand and account for sea level impacts on their communities. At the bottom there, you also see this fire information for resource management system firms that is available globally and distributes near real-time information within 3 hours of satellite observations to help detect the location and extent of fire activities and their effects on land and the atmosphere. And so this again provides critical information on location, extent, and intensity of wildfire activity and its effects. Another example of a recently released dashboard is this biomass Earth data dashboard, but again is an example of international collaboration coordinated through the Committee on Earth Observation Satellites here. And so biomass, the living part of vegetation systems, plays a crucial role in climate. Around half of biomass is carbon, so deforestation and other types of destruction of vegetation releases carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So we have several missions, both existing and forthcoming from NASA, the European Space Agency, JAXA, that are looking to provide and map this above ground biomass. However, what happens is that many times the information and data sets that are coming from these different sensors and technologies can produce different estimates, and that can get confusing. And so the international community has come together to help address some of these data disparities and provide a harmonized information around biomass data sets based on space-based observations. As part of this effort, there are also some pilots at the country level that are looking to demonstrate how space-based data sets can support and improve national biomass and forest carbon stock estimation in different countries. So the next example that I want to share with you now is an example of a practical application that has involved collaboration from a range of stakeholders across academia, the government, and also the private sector. And so this is to really help put together and provide a web-based application that provides information on evapotranspiration rates to stakeholders in the Western United States across 17 Western states. It's called OpenET. It was recently released. And again, it is the outcome of interagency and across sectors collaboration and can be used by a range of end user communities, including rural communities, growers, water managers, as well as policymakers. Moving on to the next example that I wanted to share with you, I wanted to touch upon urbanization and looking across cities, but also different types of human settlements. So an important pledge in many of these international agreements, like the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development, has been to leave no one behind, emphasizing the need to reach the most vulnerable populations. And so to do that, we need to understand and to be able to map where people are and what is their access to different types of infrastructure and services. And so here you can see an example of where NASA has been working through the Group on Earth Observations and a dedicated initiative on Earth Observations for Sustainable Development Goals, EO4SDG, with the UN Human Settlements Program to bring together a range of over 30 international partners to help share and make more findable and accessible Earth observation data sets and tools of relevance to sustainable cities and human settlements. And so in this slide, you can see some examples of these different types of data sets and tools that are available through this resource, online resource, which again is openly available. And so some of them, for example, provide ways to look at a range of population estimates that are affected by different types of hazards like landslides, floods, earthquakes. In addition to that, we have been able to gather a number of use cases that share how cities and national governments are leveraging this earth science derived knowledge to address urban related monitoring and planning needs. For example, the government of Colombia is using optical satellite imagery from the American Landsat and European Sentinel-2 satellites to map how land cover is changing in a number of representative cities in Colombia, and then take that and combine it with information on the population in those cities to assess how different cities are consuming land against the rate of population growth. And so this, not only does it help to provide information and help the country assess progress of its cities in growing sustainably, but it also informs city authorities about changing demand for public goods and services, identifying new areas of growth, and also helping proactively influence sustainable development and build resilience to climate change related impacts. And so for my last examples and last two slides, I wanted to also include a couple of initiatives, NASA-led and also international geo-led effort to bring together and work with local communities, including indigenous people, to really connect indigenous knowledge systems and earth science to help address some of those pressing climate-related issues and sustainable development issues for these local communities. And so here on this slide, you see efforts by this NASA Indigenous Peoples Initiative to work across a number of stakeholders, including the Navajo Nation, the Samish Indian Nation, among others, to both help build capacity through trainings, in-person workshops, and also develop tools that, again, leverage and make more easily available information from satellites and combine it with model outputs and local knowledge to help assess drought severity and help support relevant management decisions. And so in addition to these efforts, the GEO community, the Group on Earth Observations community, and the GEO Indigenous Alliance has been advancing a global network with dedicated indigenous working groups focusing on indigenous youth, disaster risk reduction, climate action, among other key topics. And so hopefully through this presentation, I've shared some key examples of where efforts are being made. And again, these are representative examples. And hopefully throughout these examples, you have seen the importance of interdisciplinarity, of partnerships, of user-centered and user co-designed approaches, and also the importance of making all this information openly available. So the importance of open science and open shared knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Archie. That was absolutely fascinating. Frustratingly, we're sort of slightly pushed for time. I've got a billion questions I want to ask you. Actually, just very quickly, if people do have questions they want to ask you or pick your brains, where's the best place we can sort of send them to?
Yeah, that's wonderful. So I'll include a couple of links to the chat, and also happy to share my email as well.
Fantastic.
So why don't I do that? Mm-hmm.
That's really good. That's really good. Just before we go, I've just got a little bit of housekeeping, just to say I'm instructed to encourage delegates to network amongst yourselves and to explore the virtual pavilion here and talk amongst yourselves and carry on the conversation. And also I want you to, if you can, visit the exhibitor information page as well. Our kind exhibitors who are here doing wonderful work. I know they would appreciate you having a look at their stuff. Suzie, what else do we need to do before we sign off?
Well, I think what we need to do to start with is thank everyone that has joined us today. It's been really fantastic to hear from such a range of speakers, speaking so clearly and so eloquently on these really important subjects. So thank you to everyone for taking the time to join us today. Thank you for all those who sponsored the pavilion, all of our sponsors. And again, you can go and check them out on the virtual space. I think I'm actually just going to throw over to Luca for a moment to give us a brief update on what's coming up still in the pavilion. Luca.
Thank you, Suzie. And thank you, Dallas, as well, and all our speakers. It's been a fantastic session. We are approaching the end of this plenary morning, but we actually have another 2 days to go. And this afternoon and throughout tomorrow, we have a number of parallel sessions where we're looking at the role of space and geospatial in solving specific challenges in specific sector. We start in this afternoon with a session by UK Space and around innovation, science and innovation, moving forward to another one from Scottish Space Leadership Council and Location Data Scotland on the future of transport, looking at the mobility landscape. These two sessions will be parallel and running at 12:30. So please join in if you are interested in this subject. And then we have another one later this afternoon at 3 o'clock, a session on adaptation, loss and damage, looking at how space data and technologies empower climate action with example from all around the world. I think we have speakers from 10 different countries joining in. And this session is run by Space for Climate and Data for Sustainable Development Goal. We have more going on tomorrow, but this is it for now. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time and being with us today.
Thank you, Luca and Andy. Basically, that's your Wednesday sorted out. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to go outside in the rain. You can just be in the virtual pavilion all day. And tomorrow, Suzie and I will be back tomorrow, won't we?
Yes, we'll be joining you again tomorrow afternoon to wrap up the virtual pavilion. But again, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure to hear from our guests, and I hope you've enjoyed the session.
We'll see you tomorrow.